Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And a very warm welcome to you. This is Africa World Hour, the Tuesday edition, as we bring you the very latest news that's happening around the continent and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us for the African perspective on all things news and current affairs from the heart of Africa to all corners of the globe. Your perspective is most welcome as we share with you the faces, the voices and the perspectives that matter on the world development. So do stay with us as we take you through the next 60 minutes. I am Tsepiso Makwetla. Thanks for joining us. Let's go straight to our news headlines today.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Well, let's start with this. Former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, one of the most influential politicians of his generation, has died. His family say the 84-year-old died from complications of pneumonia and cardiac arrest, as well as vascular disease last night. The BBC's Rob Watson looks back at his career.
Dick Cheney became a familiar face on the world stage as the first President Bush's Secretary of Defense during the Gulf War in 1991. He was a very wealthy man. In a break from his political career, Dick Cheney made a fortune as the chief executive of the oil company Halliburton. He returned to politics as George W. Bush's running mate in the presidential election of 2000. Though always a hawk, the attacks of September 2001 seemed to transform Dick Cheney's worldview. Shocked by the attacks, he embraced the neoconservative ideology of aggressively pursuing the spread of democracy worldwide as America's best defense against terrorism.
Tensions are rising in Mali, where a 2-month-long fuel blockade imposed by al-Qaeda-linked militants has brought much of the capital, Bamako, to a standstill. Schools have closed, businesses are struggling, and diesel-powered electricity is in short supply. The group behind the blockade, Jama al-Nusrat al-Islam wa Muslimin, or JNIM, has been operating just outside of the city. The strategy of economic disruption is putting unprecedented pressure on the military government, raising fears of political instability. Dr. Falahani Aina, security analyst and lecturer in political economy of violence, conflict and development at SOAS, University of London, has more.
Jenin is an Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorist organization. It's the largest and the most formidable terrorist organization currently in Africa and the wider Sahel region. They've got about 6,000 to 7,000 fighters. They also use a very sophisticated weaponry and tactics during their operations, some of which includes the use of drones, and also IEDs, improvised explosive devices. So they, to a large extent, yield significant strength.
ZAPU Secretary General Mtulisi Hanana has called for Zimbabweans to unite, including those in the diaspora, in response to ZANU-PF's move to extend President Emmerson Mnangagwa's tenure until 2030. Mnangagwa, who assumed office in 2017, is constitutionally bound to serve only 2 terms. Opposition parties and activists, including Hanana, who addressed the media at the Zimbabwe Diaspora Press Conference, have strongly opposed this extension.
We come together even from foreign lands, and we are also encouraging others in different parts of the world to do the same, to mobilize themselves and mobilize Zimbabweans and come up with strategies so that we are able at the right time to peacefully protest against the government of Zimbabwe and what they are doing, considering as well that they won the 2023 elections under a shrouded cloud of mystery. The elections, according to some of us, they were not free, they were not fair.
The body that oversees the European Convention on Human Rights says it's ready to discuss reforms to the treaty as global pressure grows over migration. 9 EU member states and the UK have called for it to be reworked. The convention was created after the Second World War to protect fundamental rights and political freedoms. The BBC's Dominic Cassiani has more.
Fundamentally, this is going to come down to the 46 member states and where they all end up. And I think what you've got to think about there is whether or not a form of wording changes, particularly around perhaps what's called Article 8, the right to privacy and family life, whether or not the countries can come up with tweaks to that which balance their feelings that they need to have more control as they see it over migration within and across Europe, but also effectively adhere to the central human rights principles at the heart of this organisation.
An archaeological discovery in northwest Kenya has suggested that the ability to invent and pass on technologies to survive may have been innate to the very first humans. Researchers found that the primitive humans who lived nearly 3 million years ago used stone tools continuously for 300,000 years. The BBC's Caleb Gosh reports.
Until now, the evidence has been that early on, human tool use may have been sporadic, randomly developed and quickly forgotten. The discovery, however, of stone tools at different archaeological layers is the first to show that the technology was passed down through thousands of generations. The researchers say it provides strong evidence for a radical shake-up in our understanding of human evolution. The evidence of stone tools at the site shows that for a long and continuous period, these early humans found a way of controlling the world around them rather than letting the world control them.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
It is now 7 minutes past 9. In a landmark moment today, President Cyril Ramaphosa received the G20 Inequality Committee report on global inequalities together with Nobel laureate Professor Joseph Stiglitz and UNAIDS Executive Director Ms. Winnie Byanyima. This is a pivotal moment under South Africa's G20 presidency, and the substance really of the report is likely to set the tone for global debates on equity, debt, health and economic justice ahead of the G20 summit to be held in Johannesburg later this month. To speak about this more sharply, Dr. Peter Karungu, political economist from SECON, joins us now to talk about this. A very good evening to you, Dr. Karungu. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I'm not sure if you have an inkling or have seen parts of the report or any of it, but I just want to talk about it conceptually at first, just why it's a significant moment, not only for Africa ahead of the G20.
Good evening, and thank you to the listeners. To me, this is the moment all economists who care about humanity have been waiting for. Past inequality has been the greatest threat to human relationship. And if you watch what we are watching today worldwide, geopolitical realignment, extremism in the world, unnecessary wars, ideological alignment, and literally hatred that we have not seen before, the bottom line is nothing less than the global inequality. We said 20 years ago, maybe nuclear war is not a threat to humankind. The threat to humankind is inequality. And that is what we are watching today. Simple statistics literally says the following, and I repeat, as we speak today, 1.5% of the rich people, 1.5% of the population control 48% of the global wealth. That is $2.214 trillion US dollars, literally controlled by 1.5%. I repeat, it's not wrong to have wealth. It's not a crime to have wealth. That's not what we are saying. We're saying the danger of inequality is that if the majority have nothing, the resources, access to health, access to good water, access to sanitation, basic human needs, 3 meals a day. In Africa, even a meal a day becomes literally a privilege. It's not sustainable. Economy says, Adam, one of them who argues, the forces of the market will always put a force that puts people to the where the majority are and not where the minority are, regardless. And that is something that we can debate for a long day. Therefore, this report in its own merit, as I read it, which says, the statistic that says, I repeat, in 2001, 1% of the top rich people captured, accessed, controlled, and owned 41% of the global wealth within that period. Whereas 50% of the poor got 1%. Now, we and you and anybody who is listening would ask, is that the case? Yes. The bigger with that is you cannot deny the fact that in the aspect of human aspiration, in the absence of having the basics, you are denied to even hope, live, and aspire. And that's where the question is.
Okay.
Where are we heading to?
Let me ask then, because I also want to look at where we are, Dr. Karung. If the report finds that of that the 1%ers, they captured 41% of all new wealth in or since 2000, while the bottom 50% received only 1%. The question is, what mechanisms in globalization, tax policy, or asset markets have allowed for this divergence?
Yeah, good question. Remember, we talk in fair market, assuming we don't have any form of socialism, assuming we allow the market forces. I repeat, allow the market forces to determine your destiny. It works on one premise, that each and every human being is born to compete on equal playing field. But that's not the case, I repeat. Meaning, if competition were to kick off and 100%, or hypothetical, 50% of the people don't even understand what it is to compete. They're already disqualified. Meaning, we need to start thinking whether it is the people who are lazy, which is commonly stated by billionaires and the rich people, or they are not smart, or they are not privileged, or they don't belong, or they are part of this system that they don't believe works. But the question is, every born child in the universe is born to aspire within an environment which she can aspire. So I agree with you that it is very difficult to be able to address, because inequality is not going to be told, you people have more, share with... No. We need to come with the policies that underpin the fact that it is not a crime to put a lot of effort, a lot of asset, a lot of countries worldwide to also come back and say, for them to be close to what we are, or even come close to create a market, then we need to address that as a multilateral institution. It's not you are doing them right. And that's why I find it very difficult when I hear people saying, no, we don't. That's number one. Number two, we need also to say to all of, particularly in the African continent, call it what it is. 30, 40 years ago, barely call it 100 years ago, to go very far, the continent was owned. All the resources were controlled, owned by people who came and found them, but not the people who belonged there. And by the time things changed for them to control, half of was gone, and the people are left deprived in every aspect. And for them now to be told, no, you are poor because you are lazy, that's nonsense. doesn't work like that, because you have to put perspective to the reality of the fact that had they not been subjected to that quagmire of subjugation to be nobody except subservient to deliver on the behalf of the masses that knew what they are looking for, then we will not be where we are.
Okay, so
but those debates are not put into the equation the way they should.
So then I want to understand, if we look at things from the prism of, the argument is often made of the Bretton Woods institutions. For instance, the World Bank, their definition of high inequality is a profile of countries that are 7 times more likely to experience democratic decline. And I underline that point because a lot of African or developing countries that are in a debt trap is because of the conditions that are laid down by the international financial institutions. So what type of leadership should South Africa show as G20 president at this moment, that's going to hand over to the United States as president on pushing for greater action against inequality?
You are very right, but go back. All these multilateral institutions were formed in 1945. We call the Bretton Woods timing of trying to discuss how do we stabilize the world after such a war, and make sure that each and every person become as competitive as they were. At that stage, they concentrated more on where the wars were fought. May it be Japan, may it be Germany, may it be other countries that needed to be redressed as such. That's number one. Number two, then were they formed considering the nature of what the poorest countries were going to face or were supposed to be. With all due respect, I would argue, they got accommodated along the line, not being the key in setting the fundamentals that was to be addressed then. That you can take to the bar, because otherwise we would not have had all these wars of colonialism, bitter terrorism worldwide, because at that stage those issues would have been addressed. It's very difficult to bring into issues of mankind after the fact, but that's the time then. But over the time, these multilateral institutions have tried to accommodate, with respect, what they are unable to address, because you cannot be able to pinpoint the policy that you implement elsewhere without having the indigenous element of it being accommodated by the people you are addressing. That's one of the weaknesses. However, not that being said, I must say that it became very, very difficult for the world now to be able to come and say, the multilateral institution, we have failed, let's do ABCD FTA. Number one. Number two, yes, the Cold War kind of polarized the world, and then the issues were not addressed because it became, where do you belong? Are you communist? I'm giving you a little bit of the history of what has transpired. But in the main, the fact is that the outcome is what we are watching, meaning the multilateral institutions have failed, the politicians have failed, our governments have failed, the situation in the world is worse off today than it was 20 years ago. Our children are more afraid now even to go to Europe, or them to come to Africa, or them to go to Asia, because humanity has become very, very... I don't know whether you understand what I'm saying.
No, I do. It's just that we have run out of time, Dr. Karungu, okay. And I do think there is certainly space to flesh out these issues in greater detail and spend more time on the individual points that you're raising, and we will do that with you during the G20 summit as it gets underway or is underway. Thank you very much, political economist Dr. Peter Karungu, just speaking to us about that report that was handed over to President Cyril Ramaphosa, the G20 Inequality Committee report on global inequalities.
Darubini ya Afrika na I am Henry Shakif.
Kapele Mutachi, tunaelezwa kwamba waziri wa zamani wa polisi Mbekisele ameanza kutoa ushahidi wake mbele ya kamati ya bunge. Pengine namna ambavyo anaelezea na kutoa ushahidi wake, hii ikoje na imekaje? Hali hii ambavyo ilivyo hivi sasa inaleta picha gani kwa raia wa Afrika Kusini?
Hii hali inaleta picha nzuri, kwanza inaonyesha kama usalama wa nchi hauko kwenye njia nzuri. Wakati wale wenyewe wanapewa nafasi ya kufanya ulinzi wa nchi na ulinzi wa raia, wanakwenda kukamatwa na wenyewe kuwa miongoni ya watu wenyewe wanakwenda tena kuziwia wala kuprotect mahalifu. Inaleta hali mbaya ndani ya nchi kuhusu usalama kwanza wa nchi peke yake, usalama wa raia.
Darubini ya Afrika kila Jumatatu hadi Ijumaa kuanzia saa 11 kamili hadi saa 12 kamili jioni majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
21 minutes past 9, and indeed so much to talk about, and unfortunately so little time, but it gives us an opportunity to keep on revisiting these issues and looking at whether or not there's been progress and where the stickler points are. So we look at another issue that we've been covering extensively in a hard-hitting report sending political shockwaves across the region. The Southern African Development Community has declared Tanzania's 2025 general election a sham. The preliminary observer mission report says the polls, which handed President Samia Suluhu Hassan a second term with more than 98% of the vote, failed to meet regional and international democratic standards. In its findings, the mission cited widespread intimidation, arbitrary arrests of opposition supporters, and severe restrictions on freedom of expression. It also condemned a sweeping internet shutdown that crippled communications during and after the vote, leaving citizens unable to access news, verify results, or report abuses. To speak more about this, we're joined by Professor Ishmael Telezani, Director of for the Organ on Politics, Defense and Security Affairs at the SADC Secretariat. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Prof.
Good evening, Tsepiso, and good evening to your viewers. Thank you for inviting me.
I just thought, even in the introduction, the points that we've highlighted from the report just in themselves sound like an indictment. And I think we've experienced that in trying to report on the elections there. But just please share with us any of the specific incidents that really stood out to SADC while they were writing this preliminary report.
Tsepiso, it's very difficult for me because I was in Tanzania for elections. Unfortunately, I had to stay for a short while because I had to go to Madagascar. So I have been working with the team virtually. But yes, there was quite a lot of challenges, particularly on the day of the elections, because the protest started the morning of the elections, just when the polling stations opened. And as it is reflected in the report, what our observers experienced with the security forces on the ground. And it was, and on top of that, Tsepiso, our mission rely heavily on internet. Our observers use tablets and they feed information to a command center where we will be based. So unfortunately, it was very difficult because of the internet shutdown. A lot of information could not be transmitted to the command center.
And you know, I'm having deja vu here, Prof, because I'm actually thinking of having done that myself, and I have exact experience of those tablets because you have to enter information as it happens, and it happens very quickly. There's so many polling stations, so I can imagine how difficult a task it was for your observers. But just what were they able to do? Were they also restricted in traveling to certain polling stations, and did they even have the correct information? Because sometimes you need an accurate map from the Electoral Commission as well.
Look, they were able to visit certain polling stations, but remember, because of the curfew, there was a curfew, and as a result of the curfew, it was very difficult for them for them to move around, and not only to move around, being in a foreign country where there are protests and you see what the police is doing. It was very difficult for them. Some of them, I must tell you, they were traumatized. It was not an easy situation for them, especially now they were cut off from communicating with anyone. It was even more difficult.
And the security situation, as you said, was something they were left traumatized. Was it particularly by that? Did they have adequate security for them to travel where they could at least reach?
Tsepiso, it would have been the first time because I've been to a number of elections. Security was never an issue. Observers travel freely. They are welcomed by the security force, by the community. It was the first time that we experienced it. Normally when we deploy, we will report to a police station, nearby police station, that observers are there, but they are not being followed by security or having protection all the time. It was the first time that they experienced these challenges.
And forgive me again for referring to my own experiences, but I've actually been an election observer where the situation was so tense that we actually needed security. So, and that in itself creates a certain atmosphere in how freely you can do your job. But let's move along and talk about the report citing intimidation, arrests, censorship. Was it able to flesh out some of the worrying incidents, or at least the breadth of it, the length and breadth of it within the country, given the fact that there was an internet shutdown? So, information was scarce.
Tsepiso, you must also understand when you release a preliminary statement, especially in a volatile situation like that, you don't want to release a statement that you will feel more fire. You don't want to release a statement that will leave the country burning. You have to strike a balance and be responsible. Much more information will come out in a final report because it's a preliminary statement, and whatever is in the preliminary statement will now go into a final report. In the final report, all the details will come out. The report is being finalized. I think by Friday, the report will be final and will be to Tanzania, but it will not be for public consumption. I think only about after 30 days, then it will be available for the public.
And I'm well aware of the responsibility that you carry as an observer mission. And unfortunately, as SADC, you also understand that you have your own critics who have accused you of long-standing turning a blind eye behavior on electoral misconduct in member states, from Zimbabwe to Eswatini. I think you and I had this conversation. So in that tightrope scenario, how do you then say to the media and those who consume the news that what you're saying is credible? Because Tanzanian officials are already accusing you of relying on opposition propaganda.
Yeah, look, Tsepiso, what we now have to wait for is maybe the government of Tanzania to write a counter to the report after receiving the report. It is within their right to dispute the report. It is within their right to submit something to the secretary that will be considered in other meetings within SADC. So that is the recourse they have, unfortunately.
That's a recourse that they have, but I'm also just trying to understand what the strategic thinking is within SADC. As you say, it is to promote democracy and maintain peace, but this is one of your founding members, so where sanction is due, it must be forthcoming and action has to be taken. It is a sober decision, I understand that, but can you give us a sense what the framework allows for and the processes that you'll undergo in order to determine whether or not serious action against Tanzania needs to be taken?
So unfortunately, what we have now, we release the report. And once we release the report, it is incumbent upon the country to look at the recommendation and implement whatever is recommended. And it serves as a recommendation. Unfortunately, we have no enforcement mechanism to enforce those recommendations. We rely on a country's goodwill to look into the report and make this as recommended by the observers.
But are there guidelines? Surely there are. Tanzania, as a SADC member, that they are held to, because with every membership of any organization grouping, there are rules and regulations to abide by. So when the report says that, the elections failed to meet international, regional, democratic standards, one would expect that something must follow.
Of course, the guidelines are there. And when we write this report, we write it against the guidelines that govern democratic elections within SADC. It's a guideline approved by all the member states within SADC. And like it says, it is a guideline. So we write this report based on this guideline, give it to a member state. And like I said to you, unfortunately, there is no enforcement mechanism. There is nothing that SADC as a secretariat that we can do. We can only rely that the member state will really do something with the report. So the guidelines are there, but unfortunately there is no enforcement mechanism.
Does this present an opportunity for SADC, and I'm not just talking about Tanzania, about the quality of membership?
What do you mean?
Well, obviously, if people are misbehaving, if somebody is part of a grouping of which there are rules and guidelines and your hands are tied because all you can do is suggest, is it time for you as SADC to rethink by the quality of membership? I'm talking about the democratic standards that you say are written down within your framework by which you hope your members will abide. Hoping, isn't that something that needs to be reviewed?
Now, I fully agree with you, Tsepiso. Unfortunately, it has to be a dialogue, and it can only be a dialogue from the top down. It has to be a top-down approach. It has to come from the masters themselves, the heads of states. If it comes from us, you can just imagine how difficult it is going to be to get it to the top. But you need a dialogue among the heads of states just to speak about all these challenges that they have in many countries. And that is what is required to move forward. And I fully agree with you. Something needs to be done. We need to really look into these guidelines. Are they working? What is working? What is not working? How can we improve it? How do we hold member states accountable?
Well, thank you very much for your time. Professor Ishmael Theledzani, Director for the Organ on Politics, Defence and Security Affairs at the SADC Secretariat, speaking to us about what has been described a hard-hitting report on the election outcome in Tanzania, saying that it did not meet democratic standards. And of course, it lists a number of transgressions, as Professor Theledzani says, but that it's still a preliminary report. The full report is still coming, and it won't be available until 30 days after it's been handed over. Brings the time to 27 minutes to 10.
With gratitude for the voices, the rhythm, and the dreams that unite us all.
Roho ya Afrika inaishi katika kila hadithi tunayosimulia.
Each new day is a gift, a reminder to pause, to breathe, and to give thanks for the laughter we share and the journeys we take and the stories that shape who we are.
Cada nascer do sol, lembre que há algo pelo qual ser grato.
La vie est un voyage, parcourons-la avec gratitude.
Channel Africa, celebrate the beauty of life with gratitude for the voices, the rhythms, and the dreams that unite us all. This is Africa with Channel Africa, the African perspective. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And speaking of winding down, here's something that you won't appreciate to be told to wind down on, and I'm talking about the capacity. So if you're planning to travel soon, there's some important notice that you need to look at before you pack your bags. The International Air Transport Association introducing new restrictions on power banks, portable chargers, and certain lithium battery devices carried by passengers on commercial flights. The new guidelines, which take effect this month, are designed to reduce the risks linked to overheating or short-circuiting lithium batteries, a hazard that has caused several in-flight incidents over recent years. We speak now to Guy Leach, who is editor and publisher of SA Flyer and Flightcom magazines. A very good evening to you, Guy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, hi, Tsepiso. Nice to be with you.
So let's just first start with these in-flight incidents that have occurred over the years, and have they been linked to devices such as batteries, and is it the capacity and necessarily lithium batteries?
Yeah, in fact, yes to all of those aspects of your question. There's been a massive increase in the transport of lithium batteries, and what's also, or lithium-ion batteries to give them their proper and full name. And what's also of note is that there's also been a massive increase in the number of, let's call them pirate batteries. In other words, batteries not manufactured perhaps to the highest standards of the brand names that are also being transported enormously. So we've seen a 25% increase, and we've seen a concomitant increase in the actual number of fires. There was a notable YouTube video doing the rounds about 2 or 3 weeks ago of a significant fire in an overhead baggage bin on an airliner, and everyone standing around looking at it, wondering what to do, because these fires are impossibly difficult well, not impossibly, but very difficult to put out, because they're self-propagating. They essentially have their own oxygen source, so you can't just suppress them or snuff them out. I think it's perhaps interesting for your listeners if I take them back to the launch 11, 12 years ago of the Boeing 787, which was the first, in a sense, all-electric airliner. And that has a massive lithium-ion battery in it. And they had a number of frightening episodes where the battery caught fire, fortunately on the ground. But they've managed to contain that. There haven't been any incidents since. They built a proper lead containment for these batteries. So the reality is that, yes, the risk and the number of fires has increased a lot, but so has the ability to actually manage these fires.
So you say there obviously has been improvement in technology to try and limit that. So is it because of really pinpointing, and I'm also wondering, is it specific to certain products and the properties used by the manufacturers that are averse to an aircraft environment?
Yeah, I'm not up to speed or familiar with the necessary differences in sort of different types of batteries for different applications. But what I can tell our viewers is that one of the prime focuses or drives of these new IATA regulations is to try and limit the size of the energy contained in the batteries, especially for the larger devices. They talk about mobility devices. For instance, there are passengers who will bring on board scooters, for instance. So those have got a huge amount of charge. So they're limiting those to a maximum of 100 watt hours, which is the equivalent of about half a cup of petrol if it catches fire. Normal cell phone devices or similar devices like readers are limited to just 20 watt hours. So it's very much more limited there. Things that our listeners or viewers might not know is that if you do bring a device bigger than 100 watt hours on board, you're only allowed to have it less than 30% charged. These are some of the aspects of the new regulations.
Oh, that's very interesting. So what else should we know that in relation to cell phones as well? Because I notice a lot of people don't comply with the instructions of putting your phone on flight mode, etc., etc.
Yeah, the flight mode has got nothing to do with the risk of batteries. The flight mode is about the interference with the aircraft systems and avionics. You can, in the cockpit, you can often hear a sort of noise, which comes from the cell phones busily trying to find a station somewhere, especially when they suddenly become in reach of the station and they're trying to log on. The issue of cell phones is really, and all other electronic devices in the cabins, is really to make sure that they don't get damaged. One of the notable aspects, if you fly business class, for instance, with electric seats, is that there are very strict and clear instructions that if you drop your phone down the side of the seat, do not move your seat to try and find it or pick it up. You must call for a cabin attendant, because what they really don't want to see is the phone getting damaged by the seat. It's damage which causes the fires, and that's the other reason. And the other big change is that they've now prohibited these batteries being carried in the hold, because it's much harder to contain a battery fire in the hold. We just need to think back the 30 or so years to the Helderberg and the loss of the entire aircraft because of a uncontrolled fire in a baggage area.
So, Guy, what sort of operational and financial impact will these new rules have on not only airlines themselves, if at all, but also I'm wondering about the regulations and policing them?
Yeah. I think that, as in so much of aviation, well, there's an expectancy that the people will naturally be responsible, because the risks are significant. The last thing you want to be is packed into a thin aluminium tube at nearly 40,000 feet, doing nearly the speed of sound, with some cowboy who's not listening to or obeying regulations. And that is why cabin attendants have got such strong laws on their side as well. So there's no financial risk really to any of this, except perhaps if you're a manufacturer of batteries and you have been forwarding them in aircraft cargo up to now. But that's obviously a very small set. The real risk or the real drive here is simply to improve the understanding of the risk and create systems that will try and obviously reduce the risk.
Guy, thank you so much for speaking to us. Always a pleasure speaking to you. Guy Leaches, editor and publisher of Essay Flyer and Flightcom magazine, speaking to us about new regulations that limit, as he says, capacity and probably in some cases having on electronic equipment such as power banks. So it brings the time to 18 minutes to 10.
In this episode of Channel Africa Conversations, Peter talks to Dr. Thulisile Buddha, an academic, author, and an expert in indigenous knowledge systems. Join us for a compelling discussion on preserving African languages and traditions in the digital era. Dr. Thulisile unpacks the role of educators, explorers, and how technologies like AI can support cultural preservation, and challenges us to rethink how we honor African heritage. You can find the episode on YouTube, SABC Plus, and on our website, channelafrica.co.za. This episode is a must-listen for educators, creators, and change makers across the continent. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa World Hour, unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And we're wrapping up now with our 2140 feature. Rwanda has named 25 people it accuses of funding and inciting terrorism, among them exiled former General Kayumba Nyamwasa, now based in South Africa. Kigali says he's linked to a grenade attacks, the FDLR militia and the outlawed Rwanda National Congress. Nyamwasa denies it all, calling it political persecution, and the former general joins us now. Very good evening to you, General. I'm just curious about the title. Do you remain a general for life once you've been a general in the army?
Well, once a general, I'm a general forever.
I did suspect that. Like a president, ambassador. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. So these accusations made against you by the Rwandan government that you are funding or inciting terrorism, how do you respond to that?
Obviously, that's what they always do. They oppress people, they kill people, and then they blame the victims. So there is no iota, there is no truth in that. And they have been at it since 2010, and they have never stopped. You know very well I was shot here in South Africa. My friend Patrick Karegeya was killed here in South Africa. And now you can see the people are writing. They are saying that they are going to ask South Africa to hunt us, that they are going to hunt us in South Africa. To them, South Africa has no sovereignty. They feel they can hunt people wherever they are. It is a generalized operation, and the way dictators always operate.
So, to some people who may not be familiar with the attack on you, and as you mentioned, Patrick Carragher, who was killed here in South Africa, if you can just give us very briefly, though, some context and how you came to be in South Africa, because one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, as we in South Africa well know, and people do get caught up in propaganda, but the question always remains, propaganda from which end? So if you could just share a little bit about your experiences, how you landed in South Africa and what you've experienced since.
Well, I landed in South Africa. As you say, I was an ambassador in India. I came to Rwanda for the funeral of my mother. While I was in Rwanda, I was accused of having been talking to Patrick Carragher, who was already in exile in South Africa. And that was true because Patrick was my friend. And in the process, there was an organization, they wanted to arrest me, accusing me indeed that I support terrorism. And yet Patrick wasn't a terrorist at all. And then they followed him and killed him here. So I came here simply because in Rwanda, there was a restriction. First of all, I didn't support Kagame's overthrow of Pastor Bizimungu in 2000, and that is very well documented. And I wasn't even very happy about the rigging of elections in 2003, when Kagame allocated himself 95% of the elections in Rwanda. The members were members of the RPF. We fought a war of liberation with an 8-point program. Among those, chiefly was to institute democracy in Rwanda. Surely you cannot be allocating yourself 95%, 99% in elections, and then you say people fought for democracy. I was not a fool. I was not a mad person to go to war with an intention of fighting for democracy, and then you go and establish a dictator. That was not my reason why I went to war.
Did you have links then, as you say, when you went to war with FDLR? Do you still have links with FDLR? And what about the RNC?
Well, you know very well, I was a member of the Rwanda Patriotic Front and a member of the Rwandese Patriotic Army. Actually, I was the chief of the armed forces in Rwanda. And we are the ones who fought against the so-called FAR and then eventually the FDLR. I'm one who fought the war in the northern part of Rwanda, stopping the insurgency. So anybody trying to link me with the FDLR must be mad, because everybody in Rwanda knows I'm not a genocidaire, I'm a Tutsi, and the genocide was carried against the Tutsis. So actually what you're talking about me, I'm a person who committed societal suicide, because people think because you're a Tutsi and when you're a dictator, you should be supported irrespective of what people should think.
No, I'm just trying to understand the accusations laid against you, and I'm sure, General, you understand that I will ask you these questions. So your brother-in-law, Frank Ntwali, is also accused of coordinating with armed groups. What can you tell us about your family and its involvement in politics, and does it still have any form of involvement in Rwanda? Is your family still here or there in Rwanda? I just want to understand your involvement as a family and your activities. The Rwandan government says you are financing terror attacks in Rwanda.
Where do we get the money to finance the terror attacks? There is actually no terrorism in Rwanda. The FDLR they talk about is actually non-existent. The area which was occupied by the FDLR is now occupied by the Rwandan armed forces and the M23. So if FDLR is in Congo, why don't they capture them? Number two, if I was financing the FDLR, the group of experts who make periodic reports, actually 2 reports every year, would have cited my name, or even international organizations would have cited my name, or they would even have cited the name of Frank Ntwali. The reason that there is that we are part of the opposition, that is true. We are members of the Rwanda National Congress, which is a peaceful opposition organization. And in Rwanda, if you are in opposition, then you are a terrorist. That's why Victoria Ingabire is always in prison, in and out, because they accuse her of terrorism. Yet she moved from Holland and went to Rwanda to go and fight to vie for presidency. But she has now rotted in prison, and they are accusing her of terrorism. In Rwanda, every journalist, if you're in Rwanda yourself and you possibly criticize the government as a journalist, they would label you a terrorist. In Rwanda, there is no opposition. You cannot have 99% of elections allocated to Kagame, and anybody can talk about opposition in Rwanda. And the opposition is a legitimate thing, and therefore we belong to opposition.
So what is your response to Rwanda putting you on this list, which they say, according to the Financial Intelligence Center, you are guilty of links and links in terms of financing and coordinating attacks, but also recruitment for RNC and P5. Do you have any recourse in fighting these allegations and proving your innocence by you refuting them publicly?
Yes, I have a recourse because they cannot because it does not exist, and they will never prove it anywhere because it does not exist. So the recourse is that it is devoid of truth. That's number one. Number two, Rwanda does that because they abuse international institutions, and they think they can only put people's names out there, but they cannot go and prove anything. Even the grenades they talk about that were thrown in Rwanda in 2010, those grenades were thrown in Rwanda when I was in India, when I was an ambassador. And they allocated them to some people, indeed in FDR and Victoria Ingabire. But when I ran to South Africa, they started saying it was me and Patrick Karegeya. So it is always diversion, and it's always a lie, and that's what the dictators do.
And talk to me about Ignace Rusagara, who I believe lives in Maine in the US and is reported to be helping to raise funds for your legal defense against these accusations. And by you, I don't mean just you, but I believe there are 5 people who are part of this effort. Can you confirm these reports?
Yes, that is a legal way of doing things. It's a public thing. And indeed, you have to challenge these things legally. And it is written on social media that you have to challenge it legally, and it is our right to do that. And I think even Kagame himself raises funds whenever he wants to pay lawyers, because he's accused also everywhere when he's plundering resources in Congo. He raises money to defend himself. So it is our legal right to defend ourselves. That has nothing to do with terrorism. Because when you are attacked, then you have to defend yourself legally, and that's a legitimate cause.
And you had said earlier on some of these accusations are ridiculous because you don't have money, and yet you're accused of living a lavish life in South Africa, taking monies that were meant to be for RNC organization. And in fact, the accusations are this is exactly why the party ended up splitting because of these actions. Your response to that?
Well, now, at one time they say we are living a destitute life. Then they turn around, they say we are living a lavish life. And I don't know what a lavish life is described, how they get to say about a lavish life. And I don't know how they say what I own. But let me say that South Africa is an open society. People can work, people can try to be able to make a living. And in any case, if I am being supported by people who belong to my organization, what has it got to do with the government of Rwanda? Who supports Kagame? Where does he get money to be flying 4 aircraft that he flies all over the place? It shouldn't be their concern that my organization helps me, because if they do that, it's simply because they know I'm a useful member and one of their leaders, and shouldn't be their problem.
And the 25 people on this list, I'd imagine you'd be familiar with them. Are you close to any or most or some of them?
Well, some of them are, yes, in RNC, but we can also see where they are based. Some are based in Belgium, others are based in France, others are based in Canada, others in America, some here in South Africa. So essentially in Rwanda, unless you are controlled by Kagame, then you are a terrorist or you are a genocide denier. And I am a Tutsi, I fought against the genocide and we stopped the genocide. But because I can, if I criticize him, then I'm a genocide denier. Because everybody who criticizes Kagame is a genocide denier or is a terrorist. So I know some of those people, but not all of them. But all of them who are in the RNC, I know all of them. And I know they are innocent. And these are people who are citizens in those countries, either in Britain or in America. And if they were terrorists, the Americans would have picked it, or the Belgians would have done it, or even the British, or even the French. So you don't just sit in Rwanda and just call somebody a terrorist, and simply because he criticizes you.
Now, Rwanda has expressed frustration to what it sees as South Africa's inability or unwillingness to help secure your arrest. Do you think that South Africa would move direction and accede to the pressure at some point? What would happen to you if South Africa should freeze your assets and limit your movement under international pressure?
Well, here the courts work. This is a democratic state. And in South Africa, you don't just pick somebody and put him on an aircraft, because Kagame thinks that they should do like he did to Rusesabagina, that you just pick somebody and put him on an aircraft. And actually the person he tried to kill, because the courts here in South Africa were able to adjudicate that I was attacked by Rwanda and the people who tried to kill me were bankrolled by the government of Rwanda. So if South Africa wants to know what I do, they'll call me and I'll be able to answer in a court of law in South Africa. But the government of Rwanda, come again?
I wanted to end the interview by asking the question, are you safe? Those of your compatriots who are in South Africa and other countries in the world who are on that list, do you believe you're safe? Are you in danger of another attack?
It is an established fact that the government of Rwanda kills people, kills refugees wherever they are, in South Africa, in Malawi, in Mozambique, in Uganda, in Kenya. They have been abducting people. This is the common knowledge. So, but the government of South Africa has got the responsibility to protect every person who lives in South Africa, and particularly those who are under threat, and I'm one of those who are under threat.
But do you fear for your life?
Well, everybody, whoever Rwandese who is in exile, everybody fears for their lives. And actually the people in Rwanda even fear more, because in Rwanda they pick people, they imprison them, or they disappear them. So every Rwandan, wherever he is always, or she is living in fear.
General, thank you so much for speaking to us. We do appreciate your candor speaking to us. General Kayumba Nyamwasa, exiled and accused, but still defiant, as you can hear, that he says his story sits at the heart of Rwanda's unfinished struggle between justice, dissent and power. And of course, he rubbishes the claims that he is financing terrorist acts in Rwanda. And that brings us to just about a minute to go to end Africa World Hour and then go into African Diaries. Nolo, I see you looking at your phone smiling.
I'm smiling at you.
No, you're not.
I really am. Just
I'm not in your phone.
Well, it's just one of those encouraging messages. So yes, the smile is from a message on the phone.
So is that part of African Diaries today? Because I know you guys talk about love.
We do. But you know what? On Tuesdays, it's a different kind of love. I think if I were to label it, I'll call it broken love. Because on Tuesdays, we usually speak about GBV-related matters. And today, we are going to touch on two sensitive topics. Well, they're always sensitive. But our first conversation, we're going to be speaking to a lady who is a survivor, and she lived to write about it. and today she is a GBV activist. But the intriguing thing about her is that she started experiencing GBV at a very young age, and that dark cloud covered her or followed her right through her adulthood. And she said she was saved by giving birth to her one and only child. So that was a saving grace, but she'll let us know what she means about that. And we're going to talk about her book, which is a novel called Katie's Arrow. In the second hour, we have a conversation with a representative from GFSA, Gun Free South Africa, and they're just going to be talking to us about the prevalence of gun-related violence within surrounding GBV. And I guess right now what they are highlighting is femicide, and we're just trying to find out what is their call to action and their Release the Trigger campaign that they're currently running.
All right, thank you so much, Nora. All the best for the show. And just to quickly say to our listeners, viewers, because I did mean to say this after we spoke to General Nyamwasa, that we are going to approach the Rwandan government to get their right of reply to his reply, really, to that list of 25 names on the terrorist list that they've compiled. It's good night from us. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.